The snow fell gently from the sky, blanketing the small town in a shimmering layer of white. It was Christmas morning, and the world outside seemed peaceful, almost magical. Claire Harper stood by the window of her modest home, watching as flakes drifted lazily to the ground. Her breath fogged up the glass as she leaned closer, trying to catch a glimpse of anything moving beyond the quiet street. But there was nothing, just silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Claire turned away from the window and sighed softly. This Christmas wasn't going to be like the ones she remembered from her childhood. Back then, her parents would fill the house with laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked cookies. Now things were different. Life had thrown its share of challenges her way, and while she tried her best to stay positive for her two young children, the weight of their struggles often pressed heavily on her shoulders. Still, she refused to let this day pass without making it special for them. She moved toward the kitchen where pots and pans sat ready on the counter. The aroma of spices and herbs already filled the air, promising a warm meal despite the cold weather outside. Claire had spent hours preparing everything herself, determined to make do with what little they had. There wouldn't be any fancy gifts under the tree or extravagant decorations hanging from the walls, but she knew that love and effort could turn even the simplest moments into something memorable. As she stirred the pot of stew simmering on the stove, Claire glanced at the clock. It was still early, and her kids were sound asleep upstairs. She decided to take advantage of the quiet time to gather some firewood from the shed out back. The old wood-burning stove in the living room was essential for keeping the house warm during winters like this one, and she didn't want to run out of fuel before nightfall. Wrapping a scarf tightly around her neck and pulling on her boots, she stepped outside. The crisp air stung her cheeks as she trudged through the ankle-deep snow toward the shed. Each step crunched softly beneath her feet, the sound muffled by the thick blanket of white covering the ground. As she reached for the handle of the shed door, something caught her eye. A figure shuffling slowly down the road. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor out for a morning walk, but as the person drew nearer, she realized it was an elderly man. His steps were slow and deliberate, each movement weighed down by exhaustion. He wore a thin coat that looked far too light for the freezing temperatures, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets, likely seeking warmth. Claire hesitated, for a moment, unsure whether to approach him or not. After all, he was practically a stranger, and inviting someone you didn't know into your home always carried a certain level of risk. But as she watched him struggle against the biting wind, her heart softened. How could she stand idly by when someone so clearly needed help? Pushing aside her doubts, she called out, "Excuse me, are you okay?" The man stopped abruptly, startled by the sound of her voice. Turning his head slowly, he squinted through the falling snow to see who had spoken. When he finally spotted Claire standing a few feet away, his expression relaxed slightly. "Oh, hello," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "I'm fine, thank you." But Claire could tell he wasn't fine. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue from the cold. Without waiting for another word, she gestured for him to follow her. "Come inside," she urged warmly. "You look frozen. Please come warm up." For a brief moment, the man hesitated, perhaps unsure if accepting such kindness was the right thing to do, but eventually he nodded gratefully and shuffled after her. Claire led him into the house, closing the door firmly behind them to keep the cold out. The contrast between the icy outdoors and the cozy interior was immediate and palpable. The scent of cooking food wafted through the air, mingling with the faint crackle of the fire in the stove. "Please sit here," Claire said, guiding him to a chair near the fireplace. She grabbed a blanket from the couch and draped it over his shoulders, noticing how frail he seemed beneath the worn fabric of his coat. "Let me get you something to drink," she added, hurrying to the kitchen. While the kettle boiled, Claire studied him from afar. His hair was silver, streaked with gray, and his eyes carried a depth of sadness that suggested years of hardship. Yet there was also a gentleness about him, a quiet dignity that made her curious. Who was he? Why was he wandering alone on Christmas morning? When she returned with a steaming cup of tea, he accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," he murmured softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're very kind." Claire smiled, though her heart ached for him. "It's no trouble at all. My name is Claire, by the way." "Harold," he replied, taking a cautious sip of the hot liquid. "Harold Whitaker." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the warmth of the fire gradually thawing the chill from Harold's bones. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than met.
The eye.
Something about the way he carried himself hinted at a life once full of purpose, now overshadowed by loneliness. She wanted to ask, to understand, but she didn't want to pry either. Instead, she focused on making him comfortable, fetching him a plate of food and ensuring he felt welcome. As Harold ate, Claire noticed the tension in his shoulders ease ever so slightly. For the first time since she'd seen him trudging through the snow, he looked at peace. And in that moment she felt a surge of gratitude, not for the circumstances that had brought him to her doorstep, but for the opportunity to offer him even a small measure of comfort on this otherwise lonely day. Little did she know, this simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. As Harold ate, the room grew quieter except for the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft clink of his spoon against the plate. Claire watched him carefully, unsure whether to interrupt his meal with conversation or simply let him enjoy the moment in peace. But curiosity got the better of her, and after a few minutes she decided to break the silence. "Do you live nearby?" she asked gently, her tone warm and inviting. "I don't think I've seen you around before." Harold paused mid-bite, lowering his spoon as if considering how much to share. For a brief moment he seemed lost in thought, his gaze drifting toward the flickering flames in the fireplace. Then with a faint smile he replied, "Not exactly. I live, well, I suppose you could call it living. It's more like existing, really. Alone in a small apartment on the edge of town." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotion. Claire felt a pang of sadness but didn't press further. Instead, she nodded sympathetically. "That must be hard, especially during the holidays. Do you have family close by?" At this, Harold's expression darkened slightly. He set the spoon down entirely and leaned back in his chair, wrapping the blanket more tightly around himself. "Once upon a time, yes," he said slowly, his voice tinged with both nostalgia and regret. "But that was a long time ago. Things changed. People drift apart, don't they? Sometimes because of choices we make, sometimes because life just pulls us in different directions." Claire listened intently, sensing the weight behind his words. She wanted to ask what had happened, what choices or circumstances had led him to spend Christmas alone. But she resisted the urge. Some stories weren't meant to be pried open. They revealed themselves when the storyteller was ready. Instead, she offered him another slice of bread and encouraged him to continue eating. "Well, you're not alone today," she said with a reassuring smile. "You're here with me and my kids, and trust me, once they wake up, this house will feel anything but quiet." Harold chuckled softly at that, the sound surprising even himself. "Kids, huh? How many do you have?" "Two," Claire replied proudly. "A boy and a girl. They're still asleep upstairs, probably dreaming about presents under the tree." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "We may not have much, but I try to make sure they know they're loved. That's what matters most, right?" Harold nodded thoughtfully, his eyes softening. "You're absolutely right. Love is everything. Money, possessions, they come and go. But love, that stays with you forever, even when times are tough." The conversation shifted naturally after that, with Harold sharing bits and pieces of his past. He spoke fondly of his younger years, describing a bustling household filled with laughter and warmth. There were memories of holiday gatherings where tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, and evenings spent gathered around the piano, singing carols late into the night. He talked about meeting his wife, Margaret, and the joy of raising their daughter together. His eyes sparkled as he recounted these moments, painting vivid pictures of a life rich with connection and happiness. But then, his tone shifted. The sparkle dimmed, replaced by a shadow of sorrow. "Margaret passed away years ago," he admitted quietly. "And our daughter, well, let's just say we didn't see eye to eye on certain things. We had disagreements, misunderstandings. Before I knew it, years had gone by without hearing from her. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything different." Claire's heart ached for him. She couldn't imagine enduring such profound loss and isolation. Yet despite his pain, there was a resilience in Harold's demeanor, a quiet strength that spoke of someone who had weathered storms and come out the other side battered but not broken. "I'm so sorry," she murmured sincerely. "That sounds incredibly difficult." Harold shrugged, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Life has a way of testing us, doesn't it? But I've learned to focus on the good memories rather than dwell on the bad ones. Still," he trailed off, glancing around the cozy room, "it's nice to sit here today, surrounded by kindness. You remind me of Margaret, you know. She always had a way of making people feel welcome, no matter who they were or where they came from." Claire blushed at the compliment, shaking her head modestly. "I'm just doing what anyone else would do. Honestly, I can't imagine turning someone away, especially on a day like today." Harold studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "That's rare, you know. Kindness isn't as common as it used to be. People get caught up in their own lives, their own problems. They forget how powerful a simple act of generosity can be." His words lingered in the air, resonating deeply with Claire. She realized that while she had invited Harold in purely out of compassion, her actions might mean far more to him than she'd initially understood. It wasn't just about offering food or shelter. It was about reminding him that he mattered, that he hadn't been forgotten. After finishing his meal, Harold thanked her profusely, his gratitude evident in every word. "You've done more for me today than anyone has in years," he said earnestly, clutching her hands in his. "I won't forget this, Claire. Not ever." She smiled warmly, touched by his sincerity. "It's nothing, really. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay? Maybe stop by again sometime if you need anything." Harold nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wouldn't be returning. As he stood to leave, Claire helped him bundle up in his coat and scarf, ensuring he was as protected from the cold as possible. She walked him to the door, watching as he stepped cautiously onto the snow-covered porch. "Thank you again," he said one last time, turning to face her, "for everything." And with that, he disappeared into the snowy morning, leaving Claire standing in the doorway, her thoughts swirling with questions. Who was Harold Whitfiacre, really? What had brought him to her doorstep on this particular day? And why did she have the distinct feeling that their encounter was far from over? Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated, all because of the kindness she had shown to a lonely stranger. On Christmas morning, Claire closed the door gently after watching Harold disappear into the snowy morning, her mind still replaying their conversation. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to him, something he hadn't said, but perhaps hinted at in his words and demeanor. His gratitude had been overwhelming, almost as if she'd done far more than simply offer him a meal and a warm place to sit. But how could such a small act of kindness hold so much weight? Shaking her head slightly, she decided not to dwell on it too much. After all, Harold was just a kind old man passing through her life briefly. She turned back toward the living room, intending to tidy up before her children woke up, when suddenly there was a sharp knock at the door. Startled, Claire froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. Who could possibly be visiting her house this early on Christmas morning? The sound came again, firmer this time, echoing through the quiet home. Her curiosity quickly overrode her hesitation, and she hurried to open the door. Standing on her porch were two impeccably dressed men, their polished shoes dusted with fresh snow. They looked out of place against the backdrop of her modest home, their tailored suits and leather briefcases standing in stark contrast to the simplicity of her surroundings. One of them held an envelope in his gloved hand, its edges sealed tightly with wax. Both men wore serious expressions, their faces unreadable yet oddly formal. "Can I help you?" Claire asked cautiously, unsure what to make of their unexpected arrival. The taller of the two stepped forward slightly, removing his hat with practiced precision. "Good morning, ma'am," he said in a calm, professional tone. "My name is Mr. Bennett, and this is my colleague, Mr. Grayson. We're attorneys representing Mr. Harold Whitaker." Claire blinked in confusion, her mind racing to process his words. Attorneys? Representing Harold? What did that even mean? "I'm sorry," she stammered, "but are you sure you have the right address? I only met Mr. Whitaker about an hour ago." Mr. Bennett nodded solemnly, as though he'd anticipated her reaction. "Yes, ma'am, we're quite certain. Mr. Whitaker instructed us to deliver this to you personally." He extended the envelope toward her, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Claire hesitated, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the offered item. "But why me? I barely know him. He stopped by for some food, that's all. This doesn't make any sense." Mr. Grayson, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat softly. "We understand your confusion, Mrs. Harper," Claire supplied automatically, still staring at the envelope as though it might contain answers to questions she hadn't yet formed. "Claire Harper." "Mrs. Harper," Mr. Grayson continued smoothly, "we aren't privy to the full details of Mr. Whitaker's intentions. However, he was very clear about delivering this document to you without delay. Whatever it contains, it comes directly from him." Claire took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Something about the situation felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Why would Harold send lawyers to her doorstep so soon after leaving? Was this some sort of prank or misunderstanding? Yet the men before her seemed completely genuine, their professionalism unwavering. Finally, she reached out and accepted the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she held it. "Thank you," Mr. Bennett said with a polite nod. "If you have any questions once you've reviewed the contents, please don't hesitate to contact us. Our information is included inside." Before Claire could respond, both men tipped their hats respectfully and turned to leave, their footsteps crunching softly in the snow as they descended the porch steps. Within moments they were gone, swallowed by the white expanse of the neighborhood streets. Claire stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the mysterious envelope, her pulse racing with a mix of excitement and unease. Closing the door behind her, she leaned against it for support, her thoughts spinning wildly. What could this possibly be about? Had Harold somehow mistaken her for someone else? Or was this his way of repaying her kindness? Swallowing hard, she moved to the kitchen table and sat down, placing the envelope carefully in front of her. Its surface was smooth and crisp, the wax seal bearing an intricate design that looked expensive and official. For several long minutes, she simply stared at it, debating whether to open it right away or wait until later. Eventually, curiosity won out. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded neatly inside. Unfolding it, she began to read, her eyes widening with each line. It was a handwritten letter from Harold, addressed specifically to her. His handwriting was elegant but shaky, betraying the frailty she'd noticed earlier. As she absorbed the words, her breath caught in her throat. "Dear Claire," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then my plan has succeeded. First, let me express my deepest gratitude for the warmth and compassion you showed me today. You welcomed a stranger into your home without hesitation. Sharing what little you had during a season meant forgiving. Few people possess such selflessness, and I am eternally grateful to have crossed paths with you. I must confess, however, that our meeting was not entirely coincidental. I chose to visit your home because I've been watching you from afar. Not in a sinister way, I assure you, but with admiration. Your strength, resilience, and love for your children inspire those around you, even if you don't realize it. Today, you reminded me of qualities I thought the world had forgotten: kindness, humility, and generosity. Now, allow me to explain why I sent the lawyers to your door. Many years ago, I became estranged from my family due to disagreements and misunderstandings. Since then, I've lived quietly, keeping mostly to myself. Recently, I discovered that I am the sole heir to a significant fortune left behind by relatives I haven't spoken to in decades. Knowing that I won't live much longer, I made arrangements to ensure that this wealth benefits those who truly deserve it. Claire, you are one of those individuals. Enclosed with this letter are legal documents transferring half of my estate to you. Please don't feel obligated to accept it. It is yours freely, given with no strings attached. Use it to build a better future for yourself and your children, and continue spreading the same kindness you showed me today. That is all I ask. Claire's hands trembled violently as she finished reading, tears welling up in her eyes. Half of his estate? She couldn't begin to comprehend what that meant. Harold had mentioned having disagreements with his family, but she never imagined he was wealthy, or that he would choose to give part of his fortune to her, a complete stranger. The enormity of the gesture overwhelmed her, leaving her speechless. For several minutes she sat motionless, the letter clutched tightly in her hands. Questions swirled in her mind. Should she accept this? Was it ethical to benefit from someone else's misfortune? And most importantly, why had Harold chosen her? She knew she couldn't decide anything rashly. This decision required careful thought and consideration. Just as she was beginning to gather her thoughts, the sound of footsteps overhead reminded her that her children would be waking up soon. Pushing aside her emotions temporarily, she tucked the letter and envelope safely into a drawer, resolving to revisit them later. For now, she needed to focus on making Christmas special for her kids, even as her mind buzzed with the implications of Harold's unexpected gift. Little did Claire know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change her life and the lives of countless others in ways she could never have imagined. The rest of the morning passed in a blur for Claire. She forced herself to push aside the shock of Harold's letter and focus on her children, determined to give them the joyful Christmas they deserved. As she helped them unwrap their modest gifts, a handmade doll for her daughter and a wooden toy car for her son, she smiled and laughed along with them, hiding the whirlwind of emotions churning inside her. Yet, even as she played the role of the cheerful mother, her mind kept drifting back to the envelope tucked away in the drawer. What did it all mean? Why had Harold chosen her? And how could she possibly accept such an extraordinary gift? After lunch, when the kids were engrossed in their new toys, Claire slipped into the kitchen under the pretense of cleaning up. In reality, she needed a moment to herself, to think, to breathe, to process everything that had happened. Pulling the letter from the drawer, she read it again, each word sinking deeper into her heart. The generosity stunned her, but so did the weight of responsibility it carried. Half of Harold's estate? It was almost too much to comprehend. She sat at the table, staring out the window as snow continued to fall gently outside. Her thoughts raced in circles. On one hand, accepting this inheritance could change everything for her family. No more worrying about bills or stretching every dollar to its limit. She could provide stability for her children, give them opportunities she'd only dreamed of. But on the other hand, the idea of benefiting so greatly from someone else's wealth felt wrong. Wasn't this money meant for Harold's family? Even if he was estranged from them, didn't they deserve a chance to reconcile? Claire sighed deeply, rubbing her temples as if trying to massage away the confusion. She wished she could talk to Harold directly, ask him why he'd done this, what he expected of her. But he was gone now, vanished into the snowy morning like a ghost. All she had left of him were his words on paper, and the lawyer's business card tucked inside the envelope. Her eyes fell on the card, its sleek design stark against the worn surface of the kitchen table. Maybe she should call them just to understand the situation better. They might be able to explain things Harold hadn't mentioned in his letter. With a mix of hesitation and resolve, Claire picked up the phone and dialed the number printed on the card. "Good afternoon, Bennett and Grayson Law Firm," a crisp voice answered after a few rings. "Hello," Claire began, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Claire Harper. I received a letter today from Mr. Harold Whitaker, delivered by two of your attorneys. I I have some questions about it. There was a brief pause on the other end before the receptionist replied warmly, "Of course, Mrs. Harper. Let me connect you with Mr. Bennett. He'll be happy to assist you." A moment later, Mr. Bennett's calm voice came through the line. "Mrs. Harper, thank you for reaching out. How may I help you?" Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything. This inheritance. Can you tell me more about it? How much are we talking about, and why me? I barely know Mr. Whitaker." Mr. Bennett hesitated briefly before responding. "Understandably, this must come as quite a surprise. To answer your first question, Mr. Whitaker's estate is substantial. While I can't disclose exact figures over the phone, suffice it to say that half of it represents a significant sum, one that would undoubtedly ease many financial burdens." Claire's stomach churned at the confirmation. Substantial? Significant? Words like these seemed abstract until applied to real life. Suddenly, visions of paying off debts, buying a bigger house, sending her kids to college, all the things she'd once thought impossible, flashed through her mind. But guilt quickly followed. Could she really justify taking this money? "And as for why you were chosen," Mr. Bennett continued, interrupting her spiraling thoughts, "that decision rests entirely with Mr. Whitaker. From our conversations with him, it's clear he holds you in very high regard. He spoke of your kindness, your willingness to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. Those qualities resonated deeply with him." Claire swallowed hard, touched yet uneasy. "But isn't there someone else who should receive this? A relative, maybe? Even if he wasn't close to his family, shouldn't they have a say in this?" Mr. Bennett's tone softened. "Mr. Whitaker made his wishes explicitly clear. He has no living relatives actively involved in his life, and those who remain are either unaware of his circumstances or uninterested. His decision to leave part of his estate to you reflects his desire to reward genuine goodness rather than obligation." The lawyer's explanation did little to ease Claire's internal conflict. Rewarding goodness sounded noble, but the magnitude of this reward left her feeling unworthy. Who was she to inherit such wealth? Just a single mother doing her best to get by. Surely there were others far more deserving. "I don't know what to do," she admitted quietly, her voice breaking. "This feels overwhelming." Mr. Bennett paused, allowing her a moment to collect herself. When he spoke again, his words carried a note of reassurance. "It's perfectly natural to feel conflicted, Mrs. Harper. Decisions like this aren't easy, but remember, Mr. Whitaker entrusted you not just with his wealth but also with his faith in your character. He believed you would use it wisely, for good. That's something worth considering." His words lingered long after the call ended. Claire hung up the phone, her mind buzzing with renewed clarity and doubt. Yes, Harold had trusted her, but could she live up to that trust? Accepting this inheritance wasn't merely about gaining financial security. It was about honoring the spirit behind the gift. If she turned it down, wouldn't that dishonor Harold's intentions? Wouldn't it negate the gratitude he'd expressed so earnestly? As evening approached, Claire decided she needed closure. She couldn't move forward without understanding Harold better, without knowing whether she truly deserved this incredible act of generosity. Wrapping herself in a coat and scarf, she stepped outside once more, trudging through the snow toward the address Mr. Bennett had provided during their conversation. It wasn't far, just a short walk, but the journey felt longer, weighed down by her swirling emotions. When she arrived at Harold's apartment building, she hesitated at the entrance. Should she knock on his door? What if he wasn't home? Or, worse, what if something had happened to him? Steeling herself, she pushed open the door and climbed the stairs to the third floor, where his unit was located. Outside his door, she knocked softly, her heart pounding in anticipation. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. Fearing the worst, she glanced around nervously before spotting a neighbor peeking out from across the hall. "Excuse me," she called out timidly. "Do you happen to know Mr. Whitaker? Is he all right?" The elderly woman frowned sympathetically. "Oh dear, I'm afraid you're too late. Poor Harold passed away last night. Peacefully, they said. Such a kind man, always keeping to himself. Claire's knees nearly gave out beneath her. Passed away? Last night? The realization hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless. Harold was gone. Forever. And she'd never get the chance to thank him properly, to ask him why he'd chosen her, to assure him that she understood the gravity of his gift. Tears streamed down her face as she leaned against the wall for support. Somehow she managed to make her way back home, her steps heavy with grief and disbelief. Once inside, she collapsed onto the couch, clutching Harold's letter tightly in her hands. Though he was no longer here, his presence lingered in the warmth of her home, in the laughter of her children, in the flickering glow of the fire. Harold had given her more than money. He had given her hope. Hope that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward and create waves of change. Now, it was up to her to carry that hope forward, to honor his memory by using his gift to make a difference, not just for herself, but for others too. And in that moment, Claire knew exactly what she had to do. The days following Harold's passing were a blur for Claire. Between processing her emotions, caring for her children, and navigating the legalities of the inheritance, she barely had time to pause and reflect. Yet, even in the midst of chaos, one thing remained crystal clear. Harold's gift wasn't just about money, it was about trust. He had entrusted her with something far greater than wealth. He had given her an opportunity to transform lives, starting with her own. Claire spent hours sitting by the fire at night, Harold's letter clutched in her hands, rereading his words over and over again. Each sentence carried weight. Each phrase resonated deeply. "Use it to build a better future," he had written. "Continue spreading the same kindness you showed me today." These weren't empty platitudes. They were instructions, a roadmap for how she should approach this life-changing blessing. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that this wasn't just for her or her family. It was meant to create ripples of good that extended far beyond their little home. But accepting such generosity didn't come easily. Doubts gnawed at her relentlessly. Was she truly worthy? Could she live up to Harold's expectations? What if she made the wrong choices and squandered his legacy? These questions haunted her during sleepless nights, but they also pushed her to seek guidance from those she trusted most. One afternoon, after putting her kids down for naps, Claire bundled herself up and walked to Sarah's house. Sarah had been her best friend since childhood, a steady presence through all of life's ups and downs. If anyone could help her sort through this tangled web of emotions, it was her. Sarah greeted her warmly, ushering her inside and handing her a steaming mug of tea. "You look like you've got the world on your shoulders," she teased gently. "What's going on?" Claire hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could she explain something so monumental without sounding like she'd lost her mind? Finally, she took a deep breath and told Sarah everything, from meeting Harold on Christmas morning to receiving the lawyer's visit and discovering the extent of his generosity. As she spoke, Sarah listened intently, her eyes widening with disbelief. "Are you serious?" Sarah exclaimed when Claire finished. "That's incredible, unreal, honestly, but I can see why you're struggling. This is huge." "It's not just huge," Claire replied, shaking her head. "It's overwhelming. I feel like I'm carrying this enormous responsibility, but I don't even know where to start. What if I mess it up? What if I do something Harold wouldn't approve of?" Sarah leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on Claire's arm. "Listen to me. You're overthinking this. Harold chose you for a reason. Not because you're perfect, but because you're kind, compassionate, and hardworking. Those qualities are exactly what he saw in you that day. Trust yourself. You'll figure it out step by step." Her words brought a small measure of comfort, but Claire still needed clarity. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into research, reading books on financial planning, philanthropy, and community development. She wanted to ensure every decision she made aligned with Harold's wishes, to use his gift wisely and for good. Slowly, ideas began to take shape in her mind. First, she addressed her immediate needs. Paying off debts lifted an enormous burden off her shoulders, allowing her to breathe freely for the first time in years. Next, she set aside funds for her children's education, envisioning a future where they wouldn't have to worry about scholarships or loans. With these practical matters settled, she turned her attention to the larger picture. How could she honor Harold's memory while helping others? Inspiration struck one evening as she flipped through old photo albums. Among the faded pictures of holidays past, she found snapshots of her parents hosting gatherings for neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had nowhere else to go. There were images of crowded tables laden with food, laughter echoing through the rooms, and faces lit up with joy. It dawned on her then. She could recreate that spirit of togetherness, especially during the holidays when loneliness often felt sharpest. With renewed determination, Claire decided to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting elderly individuals living alone, much like Harold. She named it Harold's Hearth, inspired by the warmth and connection he had experienced in her home. The foundation would provide meals, companionship, and resources to seniors in need, ensuring they never had to spend another holiday or any day feeling forgotten. To fund the initiative, Claire allocated a portion of her inheritance, supplemented by donations from local businesses and volunteers eager to contribute. Word spread quickly throughout the community, drawing interest from people who admired her vision and wanted to be part of something meaningful. Within months, Harold's Hearth grew from a simple idea into a thriving organization, hosting weekly dinners, organizing social events, and even arranging home visits for those unable to leave their houses. As the project gained momentum, Claire found herself growing alongside it. Her initial doubts began to fade, replaced by confidence and purpose. Every smile she saw, every tear of gratitude she witnessed, reminded her why Harold had chosen her. This was his legacy, now intertwined with hers, a testament to the power of kindness and the impact one act of generosity could have. Still, there were moments when grief surfaced unexpectedly. On quiet evenings, she would sit by the fire and imagine Harold sitting across from her, sharing stories and laughter as he had on that fateful Christmas morning. Though he was gone, his presence lingered, not just in the work she did, but in the way she approached life itself. His belief in her had awakened something dormant within her, a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. 1 year later, on the anniversary of their meeting, Claire hosted a special dinner at Harold's Hearth. Dozens of seniors filled the room, their faces glowing with happiness as they enjoyed music, games, and delicious food. At the center of the table sat a framed photograph of Harold, surrounded by candles. It was her way of honoring him, keeping his memory alive in the hearts of everyone who benefited from his gift. As the evening drew to a close, Claire stood to address the crowd. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to speak. Tonight we celebrate not only the season of giving, but also the man who taught me its true meaning. Harold Whitaker came into my life briefly, yet his kindness changed everything. For me, for my family, and for all of you. He believed in the goodness of people, and he trusted us to carry that goodness forward. So let's continue doing just that. Let's make sure no one feels alone. Not today. Not ever. The room erupted in applause, tears glistening in many eyes. Claire smiled through her own tears, feeling a profound sense of peace. She finally understood what Harold had known all along, that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could create endless ripples of hope and healing. And though he was no longer here, his spirit lived on through her, and through everyone whose lives he had touched, directly or indirectly. In that moment, Claire knew she had fulfilled Harold's wish. She had taken his gift and transformed it into something beautiful, something lasting. And in doing so, she had discovered a truth she would carry with her forever. Kindness begets kindness, and love has the power to change the world. Months turned into years, and Claire's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The foundation she had started in Harold's memory, Harold's Hearth, became a cornerstone of the community, touching countless lives and creating a network of support that spanned far beyond what she had initially envisioned. What began as a small effort to honor one man's kindness grew into a movement that inspired others to pay it forward, spreading warmth and compassion throughout the town. Every Christmas, the annual dinner at Harold's Hearth became the highlight of the season. Families, friends, and strangers gathered together under one roof, sharing laughter, stories, and meals prepared with love. The event wasn't just about food or festivities. It was about connection, a reminder that no one should face the holidays alone. Each year, Claire made sure Harold's photograph remained front and center, surrounded by flickering candles and handwritten notes from attendees expressing their gratitude. It was her way of keeping him close, ensuring his legacy lived on in every smile and hug exchanged. But the impact of Harold's gift extended far beyond these gatherings. Over time, Harold's Hearth expanded its reach, partnering with local schools, churches, and businesses to address broader needs within the community. Volunteers delivered groceries to seniors who couldn't leave their homes, organized book clubs for those seeking intellectual stimulation, and even arranged transportation for medical appointments. For many elderly residents, the foundation became a lifeline, a source of not just practical help but also companionship and dignity. Claire herself evolved alongside the organization. Once hesitant and unsure, she now stood confidently at the helm, guiding its growth while staying true to its mission. Her leadership inspired others to step up, whether by volunteering their time, donating resources, or simply reaching out to someone in need. Slowly but surely, the culture of kindness Harold had sparked began to take root, blossoming into something beautiful and enduring. Her children, too, were deeply affected by the changes in their lives. Growing up in a household where generosity and service were prioritized shaped them in profound ways. Her son, now a teenager, often helped organize events for the foundation, learning valuable skills in teamwork and empathy. Her daughter, always sensitive and artistic, created handmade cards and crafts to distribute to seniors during holiday celebrations. Both kids understood the significance of Harold's gift, not just materially but emotionally, and they carried that understanding with pride. Despite all the progress, there were still moments when Claire paused to reflect on how much had changed since that snowy Christmas morning. She often thought about Harold, wondering what he would think if he could see the ripple effects of his decision. Would he be proud? Amused? Perhaps a little overwhelmed himself? She liked to imagine him sitting quietly in the corner of the room during one of the foundation's events, nodding approvingly as he watched people connect and share joy. In her mind, he was never truly gone. He was simply present in different ways, woven into the fabric of everything she did. One winter evening, several years after Harold's passing, Claire found herself standing outside the same apartment building where she had learned of his death. She hadn't been back since that fateful day, but something drew her there now. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was a desire to reconnect with the place where her journey had begun. Either way, she felt compelled to visit. The building looked much the same as it had before, though perhaps a little quieter. As she climbed the stairs to the third floor, memories flooded back. The sound of her own footsteps echoing through the hallway, the neighbor's sympathetic words, the weight of realizing Harold was gone forever. When she reached his old door, she hesitated, running her fingers lightly over the peeling paint. Then, pulling a small envelope from her coat pocket, she slipped it beneath the crack, leaving it there like a secret message. Inside the envelope was a letter addressed to Harold, a thank you note filled with updates about the foundation, stories of lives touched, and heartfelt expressions of gratitude. "Thank you for trusting me," she wrote. "You gave me more than I ever dreamed possible, and because of you, so many others have found hope and happiness. I hope you know how much you're missed and how much you're loved." As she walked away, snow beginning to fall once again, Claire felt a deep sense of closure. Harold's act of faith in her had set off a chain reaction of goodness that continued to grow stronger with each passing year. And while she would never fully understand why he had chosen her, she no longer needed to. His reasons didn't matter as much as the outcome: a community united by kindness, a family lifted out of struggle, and countless hearts warmed by the spirit of giving. Years later, when Claire's own hair began to gray and her grandchildren gathered around her feet, she would tell them the story of Harold Whitaker, the lonely man who had wandered into her life on a cold Christmas morning and changed it forever. She would describe his gentle smile, his quiet strength, and the extraordinary gift he had given without expecting anything in return. And she would remind them of the lesson he had taught her, that even the smallest acts of kindness can create waves of change, touching lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. In the end, Claire realized that Harold's greatest legacy wasn't the fortune he had left behind. It was the belief that humanity is capable of incredible things when we choose to care for one another. That belief had taken root in her heart, blossomed into action, and spread outward, inspiring others to do the same. Through Harold's hearth, his memory endured, a beacon of light in a world that sometimes felt dark and disconnected. And as Claire looked back on her life, she knew one thing for certain. Harold hadn't just changed her future, he had reminded her of the power of love. Love to give freely, to trust boldly, and to live with purpose. That was the true gift he had bestowed upon her, and it was one she would carry with her until her final days.